This is Paul Peter, and welcome to episode 76 of Immigrant Masters Unite. Have you ever thought about or wanted to become a model or an actor or a musician or someone famous, someone who's actually going into Hollywood? If so, this is the episode to listen to, because guess what? Today on this particular episode, I have Daisi, who is a model who has overcome a lot of different difficulties into actually getting into model, has been able to partner with some of the most well-known brands that you have probably heard of and know about. And Daisi is sharing such a powerful message on this particular episode that is probably going to have a great impact not only on you, but on your future if you are going this direction. So I highly encourage you to listen to here, because we are going to be talking about listening to other people's opinions, what it takes to make it in Hollywood, why Hollywood is actually pretty good for immigrants. You would never think that, but a lot of the actors who are in there are immigrants. So what does it take to actually get in there? If that's your thing, just listen in, join in on this call, take notes, and without further ado, here is Daisi. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another amazing episode of Immigrant Masters Unite, where immigrants unite and transform lives. That's right. This podcast is all about helping you transform your life, your business, and the world around you. And I'm your host, Polish Peter. Now, you may or may not be an immigrant entrepreneur or business owner. That's perfectly fine. However, on this particular podcast, I get to talk to, dissect, strategize, and get into the minds of master immigrants who are either first or second generation. And, they starting from nothing and created a successful, abundant, impactful life for themselves while transforming the world around them. I literally have that kind of a person on this particular podcast today. Her name is Daisi Pollard Sepulveda. I think I got it right. Did I get it right, Daisi?
You got it right. You definitely
awesome.
got it
Very
right.
cool. Yeah, so her parents were originally, her father was originally from Jamaica. She was born here, but she is an amazing young woman who was raised in contrasting cultures, and there was a creative culture in New York City, and there's a dynasty glamour of Connecticut. And she's a Jamaican, Jewish, and African heritage. And she began modeling her career as a teen, and then went to school, got a business degree and BS in business, an MBA in leadership and management, and actually got a certification in the scenes. That's very interesting. It's kind of not part of the other stuff. But here's the cool thing about Daisi that I've learned. She is an early adopter. She was the first Miss Jamaica to compete at Miss Earth and Miss Asia Pacific. She has been raising public awareness and praise for Asia for an onstage protest for equality and labor issues. She's been an early adopter in social media and content creating. She's been producing different talents. She has been partnering with mega brands around the world. And she is really an inspiration to a lot of people because of what she's been able to do. And one of the things that I love about her, basically just talking about her, is I feel like one of her main goals in life is to break down a lot of the different barriers when it comes to Hollywood, when it comes to being in the public eye, when it comes to being in modeling, because I think a lot of people have a lot of those kinds of perceptions of what it looks like to be. So first and foremost, Daisi, welcome to the particular podcast. I am so grateful that you're on here. So tell us a little bit about yourself. About your story of your father, right? He was born there, right?
Yeah. So from a very mixed background, and my dad's family, their background is they're from Jamaica. I grew up in New York and Connecticut. I had a little bit of a stint in Virginia, but that was such a small part of my childhood. But the experience was also a little bit impactful. And you get a different perspective of American culture. but I was heavily influenced by living in New York City, living in New York and New York City, and then living in Connecticut and going to school in Connecticut, and then moving to Los Angeles and traveling around the world. So now I'm definitely have a fusion of cultures and backgrounds to pull from. And so to me now, it's like I'm an immigrant of the world in a way, because I've just spent a lot of time in different environments and immersed in different cultures and stuff. So I think like now it's very interesting because it's not just one thing that influences my life.
Awesome. Very cool. So listen, before we go into the conversation about immigrants in Hollywood and all that kind of, because I do want to have the conversation, I just want to ask you, like, why modeling? Why did you end up in that career?
So it was very interesting. When I was about 6 or somewhere between, I don't know, 6 and 9 years old, my mom had cut out a newspaper clipping in the back of the newspaper that was like a model search for kids and teens. And she put it on the refrigerator, and she was going to bring me and my sister to the model search. And I don't think I really understood the context of like what modeling was and everything, but what I saw the ad on the side of the refrigerator, and I said, well, whatever that is, I want to do that. And then there was just a couple of other introductions to the industry. I spent a brief time in a foster home as a kid, as a teenager, as of 12. And there happened to be a modeling school right across the street in a shopping center across the street from where I lived in a foster home. And I walked in there one day, and I was like, didn't really know what modeling was, but I was like, I think I want to do that. And then when I was adopted by my grandmother that same year, when I got off the plane, she immediately was like, oh, I think we're going to get you into modeling. And then I kept getting introduced to the idea. And then within the first year, I was just hooked. And I was like, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. And I don't know how that, I didn't know the limitations in terms of like ageism and discrimination in the industry and stuff like that. At that point, I didn't care. I'd already made up my mind about doing it. And through my journey of getting established, the typical stuff of like finding an agency and, getting some experience and stuff, I realized a lot of the barriers, and I also realized a lot of the opportunities and a lot of the unique value that comes from that you can get from the industry, and then also I could give to the industry. And I just decided that was it, that this is the space I want to stay in. I love this industry. I find it very empowering it can be very empowering for women. It can be very empowering for people of color. And that was just I just set my path. And throughout my life, I've just found new ways of reinventing myself in that space, and things, really important messages that I can contribute to the industry and to legitimize it, and also to make it more open for people of different ethnicities, different backgrounds. And of course, I think one of the big issues is different body types and different women on all ages.
Right.
Excuse me, across all ages.
Right, that's very cool. So a couple of things that I heard you from your share just now is one, and I think, you said that early on when you started going to the modeling, you really didn't know what was going on and who to talk to or whatever. You just went and took the first step. And I think that is a really important thing to distinguish, because I think people, what they do is they go and look about 10, 20, 30, 50 steps ahead before they actually take the first step. Like they look at the mountain as opposed to taking just the first step. And I think you mentioned at point 1.2 is you didn't know anything about the diversity or any kind of like when it comes to color and all that kind of stuff. And you weren't like your view of it wasn't colored, if that makes any sense, before that to step in. And I think a lot of people have that view, like the industry is in a certain way, and you got to be a certain person, certain type of a person to be able to go in there and actually do anything.
Yeah, very true. My idea of the industry wasn't colored at all, and you can call it like naive enthusiasm. I had a lot of that, and even through realizing that there were certain barriers or certain gates keeping, trying to keep people out, I was very oblivious to all. I didn't realize that's what it was. So that enabled me though to keep going. And I would even say now at, 38, I'm still like, I know there's barriers and gates there, but for whatever reason, I'm just kind of able to not deal with them or just go beyond them. And that is something I think is necessary if you're going to make a difference in any industry. And it's also a unique skill that you have to develop over time.
Right. And I think a lot of it has to do with your outlook and your mindset on how you look at things, because then sounds to me the way you are looking at this particular industry, or let's say maybe connecting with someone or stepping up into a different stage, or, I mean, you were in Miss, Jamaica and all that kind of stuff. It sounds to me like your mindset is a little bit like, okay, if there's a door that's in front of you and there's somebody stops you, you ask yourself the question, well, what else? What else can I do? What's next? Right?
Mm-hmm.
You don't let that kind of stop you. Just look, and you're very driven in that way. Am I about right about that?
You're pretty right about that. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, sometimes, and it's not just so linear, right? Sometimes the door closes and I can be a little bit like sad about it or down for a little while, and like, okay, but then something else takes over and it's like, okay, what next? Let me look at this differently. And that's kind of how I looked at my whole career, is just changing the lens a bit, not looking at it through like, I have to go through a certain number of gatekeepers to get an opportunity. Like, I'm very much not an institutional person. So in this industry, whether it's modeling or acting or producing and directing, the traditional course to success is that, somebody selects you, somebody chooses you, you get discovered, you get an agent, you get a manager, people choose you, you don't choose yourself. You don't decide that you're going to be successful as a creative or talent. Somebody else decides that you're going to be successful as a creative or a talent. And then you are allowed to do that. And I think that's where a lot of if you've heard the language from like celebrities and actors and performers, and they'll say, I'm so grateful that you chose me, or, when they're getting an award, and a lot of that comes from the traditional barriers to the industry. It's somebody has to choose you. And yes, there is the aspect of the audience has to like what you're making. If you're a filmmaker, yeah, it has to sell. But before you get to that point, somebody else choosing to give you that opportunity, I think is where a lot of the opportunities are cut off for a lot of people, especially people of different backgrounds, people of different cultures. They don't get the permission to try or to offer the audience something new. So that's where that whole idea of like, being discovered or choosing and going the traditional course of getting selected comes into play.
Okay, gotcha. All right. So it sounds to me like first and foremost, you got to choose yourself, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yes. Have you read that book, by the way, Choose Yourself?
Yeah. But like, listen, isn't that the truth though, right?
It is the truth.
I mean,
it is very, very true. Yeah.
You did that yourself when you were growing up, right?
Yes.
You made the decision. Yeah. So, before the book. Yeah. All right. Very good. So listen, let's talk about the subject of immigrants in Hollywood and all that kind of stuff. And right before the call, we kind of had a short conversation. And I asked you a question, and I'm like, well, are there really that many immigrants that are trying to be in that industry? And then it like clicked for me, like, well, if you really look at it, there's so many actors and actresses and models who are immigrants. I mean, look at like Schwarzeneggers, and you get Stallones and all these guys, the big superstars. Mm-hmm. Just those few guys, there are a lot of them. So there is a lot of that in the industry. So talk a little bit about that. And, I think there's a perception of it, what it takes to get in there, and actually what the reality of it is, because you kind of have the insights to it.
Yeah. So I think, so first of all, you mentioned Arnold, and Arnold is probably like the best of the best in this particular subject. I mean, a lot of people don't know that he was successful before he was like
the real estate. Yep.
Yes, the fitness guy, what bodybuilder, whatever, and before he was a movie star, and a lot of that has to do with him choosing himself. Exactly. And he never had an American accent. He never really Americanized himself, and he made it work for him. The same thing with Stallone. Heidi Klum, Iman. I'll name more people, younger people, Adriana Lima, for example, and there's a ton of people right now in Hollywood that are not American. But the thing is that Hollywood branding it convolutes the reality that they are not American, because the Hollywood branding, it says they're Hollywood, they're American. I know Hollywood is in America, and you forget that. You lose the fact that their origins are not from here. And I think for people on the outside, it's easy to forget, to lose that reality of the fact that these people, they're so far from where they started. And the audience kind of feels like, oh, that'll never be me. That could never be me. I'll never get that opportunity because of where I'm starting from. I mean, that's not true. I think that Hollywood does a disservice in that way to a lot of people. And one reason is because it keeps a lot of people out. Hollywood is a place where a lot of people are trying to get in every day to have a career. And if you have the idea that you don't have that opportunity because of where you're starting from, then it's easier to keep them out and to manage the amount of people trying to get opportunities in Hollywood. But I think also the larger issue is that the message it sends out to people in general in America, watching TV, people at home, families in Middle America, about what immigrants look like, what Hollywood is really made of. It's funny that most of the shows on TV historically have been tested in the Midwest, right? They do pilots and they air in the Midwest, like Ohio, Oklahoma, and stuff, and they're tested for speaking to the average American person. And the reality of it is, a lot of the people throughout history that are on those primetime, family-friendly, all-American shows were not American. So, you think about the people that we idolize historically, Zsa Zsa Gabor, Sophia Loren. These aren't even their real names. And we think that they are, they become Hollywood royalty, but they're not American royalty, right? They're exports from somewhere else. And so I think that we kind of lose that messaging, and we are sending out this idea of what it means to be, American, and B, what the definition of beauty is, and we're branding that as American, and it's really not.
Right. Yeah, and I think if I understand what you're saying correctly, is that a couple of things. One is, I think from an audience, somebody who's trying to get into Hollywood, and they're an immigrant, for instance, right? And they're coming into this country, or they want to get up on that stage and perform, be an actor or whatever. They look at somewhere like Arnold Schwarzenegger or Stallone and all that stuff, and what they see is their current situation, where they're at right now. They don't see like where these guys came from. Where it took for them to, for instance, like, Stallone basically lived on the street. He sold his dog, right? In order to do stuff, right? Schwarzenegger, they didn't, for most of the time, nobody wanted him to be in a movie because he's too big. He's not the typical guy, Yeah. And then guess what? He ended up being in, was it the Conan, right? And the Barbarian, the first one, and then all of a sudden Terminator. So what I'm hearing out of that is that Hollywood, as much as the perception of the public is that you have to be the certain way, in reality, I think it actually needs the diversity. It actually craves the diversity to be able to, put people in the different places to provide that to the public.
Yes, absolutely, definitely, and I think it just comes from the origins, of Hollywood. There's been immigrants, starring in Hollywood or becoming stars in Hollywood since the inception of Hollywood itself. Mm-hmm. So the idea that, I think more immigrants make it in Hollywood than actual Americans make it in Hollywood. For whatever reason. I don't know why that is, but if you look at Hollywood throughout the years, the actual story is someone that came from somewhere else and came here, had a little bit of taste of fame, or, maybe was a small celebrity in their own country, which at that time had no connection to America. Wasn't because they weren't in the digital age, and then came here and, heightened their career to, the amazing, catastrophic levels in a way. So, yeah, I think the real narrative about Hollywood is that it's full of immigrants.
Right. And here's the thing. I think the reason, because you kind of mentioned, I don't know why they're so successful. And I've done a ton of these interviews with successful immigrants. And I think one of the main common denominator among all of them is that perseverance. I think one of the things for a lot of them, when they come here to this country, just the mere fact of them actually coming to this country, leaving everything behind, right? And some of them, some crazy stories. I've heard, one guy that I know is a really good friend of mine right now. He literally escaped Vietnam on a little fishing boat with about 30 other people, went out in the middle of the ocean and just hoping that somebody's going to find him. You know what I mean? That takes something to do that.
Yes, it does.
Right? As a human being, to actually be able to do that takes something. Yeah. So I think that mentality and, not accepting no, right? Because I don't think you're the kind of a person who accepts no. Right?
No.
You find a way, don't you?
Yeah, which a lot of people find it kind of, when the person saying the no doesn't like you not accepting the no, right?
Right.
So you can rub a lot of people the wrong way, and because you don't accept the no's, and yeah, that happens. I think there is, especially when you're a woman, I think it's a little bit less acceptable to not accept the no in general, business terms, because, you're not supposed to be that headstrong, I guess, about it. But yeah, you can end up, you don't get rewarded for persevering through a no as much as, the male gender, right? But I think, you got to be okay with making people uncomfortable and making, I don't want to say making enemies, but you definitely have to, not accepting a no can definitely make some enemies. That's for sure. And I think that when you're an immigrant, a lot of times you're alone, so you're in isolation. And so that no actually has no effect on your social dynamic or in being accepted at all. So I think that's the difference. I think that's one difference, is that you're already isolated. So there's nowhere else. There's no more isolation. Yeah, exactly. So a no is not going to isolate you anymore. So, there's, and then some people don't have any choice. Even though I was raised here and born and raised here, there's been many times in my life where I just did not have another option. So I had to make something work. And the thing about, my boyfriend is also an immigrant, and one thing that he said to me that kind of sticks out in my mind is that, when you don't have another option, you just, that is your only option, as the only thing that you can do, and that's an interesting dynamic, that Americans, a lot of people here in America, you can't go hungry. So a no is just a direction being redirected into another place, another something else. But for a lot of people, a no is like dying. It means failure. It means destitute. Unlike, an American with college education and with a family, with a support system, a no. And largely we're talking about white Americans that come from decent households, right? I think for Hispanic Americans and for Black Americans, college or not doesn't make much of a difference. A lot of people in America itself, a no does mean starving or going without food at night. Right. So I think it's very true. And it can also feel like you're an immigrant in your own country.
Right.
Right.
I agree with that now.
So, just being American does not mean that all things are not created equal here. But, in the most ideal situation, a no is just, I'll go get a day job. Right.
Exactly.
A no is, I'll drive for Uber. I'll drive for Lyft. I'll do, carts, the delivery cart service, Instacart, to make some money. But for other people, and a no is literally, I'm not able to eat at night, or I don't have a place to sleep. And so I think that will drive someone to go beyond, what somebody else that has another option.
Awesome. Very cool. I agree with what you're saying there, because there's something to that. When you have that kind of mentality, it keeps pushing, moving forward, and then you end up being a success, in some shape or form. I got a question for you, because I know that for you, you started pretty young and you made the decision for yourself and you went into this industry and you became successful. If there is a little girl out there who's thinking about going in that direction, and she maybe is, immigrant, or she's a different color, or whatever it might be, come like black, white, yellow, green, whatever it might be, right? The little girl wants to succeed in this industry. What would you tell her?
Well, there's a lot, actually. I could tell there's a lot to say. My first inclination to ask someone is to make a decision about whether you really want it or not, right? And I used to think that was it. You either did something or you didn't. And now I'm a little bit more relaxed about it, and I say, start small. Try it. Like, there's so many online platforms for everything from modeling to acting to everything else. Stick your toe in. Book a small job. See if you like it. And I say that, though, from a place of having autonomy where I'm making the choices. So with that young girl or guy or whoever it is, I want them to make a decision from having their own autonomy, not waiting for somebody else to give them an opportunity, but finding their opportunity and making the decision about doing it. Like, for example, there's a lot of people offering opportunities to do, like if you go on Craigslist, for example, to do webcam modeling, right? A young girl an agency might turn down a young girl. And the young girl goes, okay, well, I'm going to make my own choices. I'm going to find my own way, and I'm going to go on Craigslist and look for, opportunities, which is a perfectly fine place to go. But there's a lot of everything on Craigslist, including, legitimate work and including adult work. And so what I think about oftentimes is a young girl going on a place like Craigslist and, looking through the listings and then submitting to a webcam job. And then the webcam company telling her that this is the only opportunity that you can have because you're not tall enough, or you're not pretty enough, or because you're not white to be a model. So you have to become a webcam model, which is essentially being an adult model. I wouldn't say it's extremist porn, but close enough. And the girl, the aspiring model, not realizing that she has the freedom and the autonomy to say, no, that's not what I want to do. I'm going to try to do this my way, a different way, not just because you said this is the only thing that I can do. So I broadened my perspective of what advice I would give someone, because just saying, make it happen to someone, you can make it happen, it's your life. I think that it's not preparing them for all of not only the barriers, but the pitfalls of being misguided and how those misguided situations come to pass. So it's more than just a piece of advice, a 30-second piece of advice. It's probably a conversation, but that's something that I would address as an issue, or as something that person is going to need to consider in their decision making.
Gotcha. What I heard from you saying this is a couple of things I heard. One is, actually three things. First, dip a toe in there to see if this is something that you really want to do. Maybe because it's a different kind of an industry, right? There is a lot of self-esteem that's involved in there and all kinds of different things like that. Second thing that I've heard is you gotta know, have a vision. This is what you really want to do, have a vision of what it is that you want to actually do in that. So then when you go into different auditions, or like you mentioned, Craig's and everything, you don't just say yes to whatever, and it's not going to take you hopefully closer to where you want to go, because there's so many different things that there's 15,000 different ways that you can go, right? And the third thing I heard is that a lot of people have opinions, and those opinions can really derail you. Like if somebody says, like you mentioned, you're not pretty enough, you're not tall enough, you're not whatever enough, right? And if you don't use that as thank you for your opinion kind of a thing, it can really take you down, right?
Yeah, exactly. Definitely. And I see a lot of girls or people, forget about, just modeling but in the entertainment industry and even in business at large, their success or their attempt at success is dependent on somebody else's opinion of them, and somebody else's, narrow understanding of the industry or their business, themselves. So, and I know a lot of thought leaders say, take feedback and take advice and listen to other people, but everybody has an opinion, and that saying, everybody's opinion is like everybody's got one.
Right, exactly.
I come from a place of being very discerning about other people's opinions about what I am capable of or what I can do, because as a woman of color in this country, there was no positive reinforcement or affirmation about what my potential could be. And if I had listened to everyone else growing up, then I would not have amounted to much. And a lot of people, will downplay your success or your role or your career choice, as my career choice, for example, as a model. That's what I chose. I didn't do it to seek your approval, right? I think a lot of immigrants, deal with the idea of what is a respectable job, right? What is a respectable career? That typically falls in, doctor, lawyer, accountant, engineer, it falls in that spectrum. Or you have to be mega famous at something else, right? If you're going to be an actor, you're going to be an athlete. You have to be, you have to be in the top 0.000.1%, right? And that's not realistic. And neither is the idea that, every industry has a spectrum of success and failures. There's a lot of poor lawyers, that are barely making it, especially all the ACLU attorneys. A lot of them are not making a lot of money. There's a lot of doctors that are not, most doctors are not making a great living, especially when you account for insurances and, the communities that they're working in. And so, and there's a lot of janky accountants walking around, so, these ideas of success and achievement, I think, are very misconstrued amongst, not only Americans, but also immigrants. And what is success?
Right.
It's what is a respectable job or a respectable career. I see that a lot amongst immigrants and, first generation and this, but I also see a lot of pushback against that, because the younger generation is saying, that's actually not what I want to do. And I want to be fulfilled and happy, and I want to be creative, and I don't want to work for someone else, or I want to choose something different. And I think, both can be very good, but both extremes can be very destructive too.
Right. Exactly. I agree with that. And I call that the distorted American dream. We come here.
That's pretty good. Yeah.
We come here to live the American dream, and it gets distorted a lot, And, for a lot of us, come here. I came here when I was 14 years old. And for me, it was, kid you not, like my American dream was from the movie Beverly Hills Cop. When he was in Hollywood, right? Big skyscrapers, palm trees, sunshine, beautiful people, beautiful women, you know what I mean? And then I came here and I ended up in Michigan, right? And I'm like, what? Where are the palm trees? There's some skyscrapers, and all that kind of stuff, right? But it's a joke. But there is that notion of distorted American dream. And I think a lot of times, if you don't look at it from, like you said, from a different point of view, it can really take you down. And especially in Hollywood, going after this, it can disempower you and take you out of the game. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So I want to make sure that I respect your time. So I have a couple of questions. If you have any tips on people coming in and trying the Hollywood, maybe getting a foot in the door or having what would you say to them? Do you have any tips for them?
Yes. As much as possible, come in with a vision. And I think if you come in without any direction or any vision, you're going to go, somebody else is going to lead you. And that other person, and more times than not, is not going to lead you in the direction that you want to go.
Exactly.
And not to villainize, not because someone else is bad for you or trying to hurt you, just because everyone is self-interested. And what's in the self-interest of someone else, if you want to be a writer, you writing for them because they say they're going to be a star or whatever. That may be true, but that may not be the direction that you want to go. And you need to use your own discernment about that. Another piece of advice is to break down your ideas about the way something should work, or the way that the industry, in this case, the industry works. And less is it working in the traditional way where, you get an agent, a manager, and, you shoot a pilot, and the pilot gets picked up by the network, and less and less is it working that way. So be prepared to create your own path. Be prepared to produce your own project and create your own opportunities. And the third thing is, don't be so quick to judge other people because they're not able to offer you an opportunity straight to the top. So I meet a lot of people, and I meet a lot of immigrants, for example, or that have been here for, new and been here for a while, and their mentality, a lot of times the mentality is, I met so-and-so, I met Tom Cruise, and Tom Cruise said that he's going to do this for me. And if you're not Tom Cruise or equivalent to Tom Cruise, you can't do anything for me.
Right.
Likely I'm going to see you 2 years from now and Tom Cruise didn't do shit for you. So you have to get out of your own way with expecting someone that is where you want to be, bringing you up with them, or reaching down and picking you up. Likely that's not going to happen. So it's a old tune that I hear over and over again. So I met so-and-so and so-and-so said they're going to do this for me. Most of the times it doesn't work out. And that doesn't mean you can't be starstruck or you can't be a fan or an admirer, but don't go in it looking for someone else to create an opportunity for you.
Right. What I'm hearing out of that is what you're saying is like, that Tom Cruise example, right? You're so focused on the Tom Cruise that he's going to do this for me, then you actually miss all the opportunities that are right there in front of you.
Yes.
Other people that can help you, because sometimes, I've done this in my own life where looking back in my own life 5 years ago, I wanted this particular thing to happen. And if I really look at it, I wasn't really ready for that yet. And I think that might be the reason for a lot of people, like they're not getting up at the top yet. Maybe you're not ready for that yet. Let's say Tom Cruise did give you that opportunity. Are you actually ready for that, right? Yeah. And sometimes it requires those stepping stones to get there, you know what I mean? And as long as you persevere, I think, and that's what I'm hearing from you, persevere, you look for opportunities, you do the work. Because I think you have to do the work, right? It's not like it's going to be handed on a silver platter for you. It's going to be, and let go of all the filters. I think, a lot of times we have this certain filter, it's got to be this way or that way. And from what you're saying, that industry has been changing quite a bit in the last few years to a point where, individual can go out there and make a name for themselves, if they keep going after it. All right. Awesome. Very cool. So listen, I want to respect your time. So I want to go into my Polish Pillars final round. So my first question for you is, what is the book that you really like or maybe you recommend to the listeners?
Choose Yourself.
Choose Yourself. There you go.
Yeah, that's it. I'm sure many other people in your podcast have probably recommended that book. It just came up as we were discussing it. But also, one of my favorite books that I tend to revisit it every year is the 22 Immutable Laws of Marketing.
Yes.
And in the back of the book, there is a long list of how people made it. And I love that part of the book because it really breaks down how money transfers, how people got the money to do what they wanted to do. And so I thought that was very interesting, and it breaks people's brains a lot about how to create opportunities and wealth.
Very cool. Yeah, I love that book. I've read that book a couple times too. So, okay, great. Next question I have for you. So, you've said a bunch of things about helping immigrants, and it was anywhere from looking in different perspective to how the Hollywood is changing and what can help with a young girl or young man trying to get into Hollywood. There was like a one last piece of advice that I think was guiding you along the way to become the success that you were. What do you think it was?
One piece of advice, oh gosh.
To tie it all.
To tie it all. Yeah, you know what? This didn't come into later in my life, but I think it's a reflection of my whole life. My mom said to me once, I gave you the human experience. So you get to live your life the way you want to. And that would, if I look back, that would have defined the best advice I've ever gotten, because I was no longer chained to expectations of other people. And I think a lot of us we are from birth, we're chained to the expectations of other people. And that gave me a lot of freedom to try things and explore and to break out of a mold.
That is awesome. Like, you own it.
Yeah.
Right? That is incredible. Right. That is very cool. Love it. All right. Next question I have for you. One thing that you would want to share about Jamaica, and maybe it's food or a custom or saying or people or anything like that we wouldn't normally know about.
So I think this kind of still stands true. One thing that people don't know about Jamaica is that it was at one time the most diverse country in the world. And I think now there's some other countries that are bringing the competition in that aspect. But it is full of people from different backgrounds and different cultures. There's a lot of Portuguese, there's a lot of Spanish, there's a lot of African heritage, obviously, a lot of Indian heritage, East Indian, and there's a lot of Chinese. So there's a lot of Lebanese, so a lot of British people, of course, but it's a very diverse place. And I think that is what lends Jamaica the unique culture and environment especially when it comes down to food and world perspective. And Jamaicans are all over the place, even in mainland China. I have ran into other Jamaicans, and I've run into Jamaicans in the Philippines and Jamaican restaurants in the Philippines. So everyone is in Jamaica, and Jamaica is everywhere. So
that's right. The Jamaica man, right? Kind of thing. Yeah, but listen, I did not know that. Like, that's such a diverse country, and that's a really good point because I wouldn't expect that. So, okay, next question. I believe that every single person in the world has some kind of a superpower. What is yours?
Oh gosh. So I've recently learned this, or taken ownership of this. I think confidence is my superpower. I've realized that I came up with this the other day. I have always had the confidence of a middle-aged white man. So
That's funny.
from the time from when I was very little, and some people will read it as arrogant, some people will read it as conceited or whatever, but I have always had a lot of confidence. And even on my lowest points in my life, I have still been able to maintain a higher than average, or what would have been appropriate for the situation, level of confidence. And that has just been my superpower, I think. And that's been what has gotten me through a lot of difficult situations.
Okay. Another question after. There is one mistake that you've ever done that you've learned the most. What's the mistake?
One? Just one? I only get one?
Well, listen, we can have 15, but we want to,
Yeah. I think, oh gosh. Listening to other people. I don't know. That's a broad statement, but I can think of a lot of small mistakes that I've made, and it was always because I listened to somebody else and not over myself. And so, fortunately, I've always been able to turn those bad situations into something, right? And I've always been able to just write it through and turn it into something else. But I would have never found myself in those particular situations if I had taken that other person's advice. So I take responsibility for the action. An example is, at one time I got married, and marriage in itself is not a bad thing. The situation, the context in which I got married, I think was not the best, which is not what I should have done. Okay. But I took the advice of someone else, and I did. And even though it was over my better judgment, and it was that actual marriage was a very negative experience, and it ended very poorly. And I through that experience, though, I learned a lot about myself. I learned a lot, which I think through any experience you can't help but to learn a lot, or something. And so because life is what it is, I did gain some things out of it. I don't regret those things, but I believe that I possibly would have gained those things another way if I decided not to get married or marry this person. And so, through that experience, I rode with it and made the most of it, because I was already in it. And it was really difficult coming out of the other side of it, and more difficult than I think it needed to be, but it was, and I did, and I came out better than when I went into the situation. But if I had it to do over again, I probably wouldn't have done it, because the process was very painful.
Right. Well, I think, I love how you are framing this, because sometimes in those failures, in those hard times, is where we learn the most and where we gain the most experience. And as much as it sucks, because it does suck going through it. I mean, I went through a divorce myself, and it was one of the worst times out of my life. But like you said, I've learned a lot about myself, who I am as a person, and how to actually, lead life and be the father and husband or boyfriend or whatever it might be, right? And as a person too. So I seriously thank you for sharing that, because I know it's not something that a lot of people would share, but I think it gives us the listeners and anybody, because we're not that much different across the board, you know what I mean? And we all go through hard times, but when you go and look at it, like, what can I get out of this as a really cool lesson, something that will help me grow? It gives you a kind of a different perspective and helps you grow in life.
It does. And people don't realize the effect that your personal life has on your professional life. Especially if you're an entrepreneur, and especially if a lot of immigrants are by themselves and they marry someone and then that's their only support system, and that it can be extremely difficult. And with my situation, we were by ourselves completely, with no external family support or community support. And that adds a lot of pressure, not only on the relationship, but also on the business, or, if you're an entrepreneur and your career, and your career suffer, and your career will suffer, especially through a divorce. And so I think about a lot of times where I could have been if I didn't have to go through that experience, what my career might look like, or what the trajectory would have been, and what it would not have been. I might not have been further than I am now, because first of all, my ability, my constitution with dealing with things was probably weaker. I think like a divorce will definitely a tough marriage, and a divorce will make you tough. Will definitely make you tougher. So yeah, there's a give and take there, but yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. All right. Next question. How would somebody get a hold of you if they would want to, find out more about you, or maybe, you help them with some things? How would they get a hold of you?
So my primary social media is Instagram these days. So it's Instagram at DaisiJo, DAISIJO. I pretty much am on every day at some point, and email. So anybody can email me at info@daisipollard.com. That's info at Daisi DAISIPOLLARD.com. And forgive me, I give my email out. It does take me a while to get back to you. So if I can get back to you right away, don't worry, I will. Yes, so that's, and my website, daisipollard.com is always up and running.
All right, I'll put the website on the show notes, and maybe your Instagram, if that's okay with you. And
sure,
send some people your way, because I think you are a pretty amazing woman.
Thank you.
I think you have a good heart. I feel like you have a good heart, and you're out there for helping other people and changing the industry and looking to, like, listen, there doesn't need to be this only one way. You can actually make it. You know what I mean? Whether you're white, black, yellow, or whatever, or tall or short, or whatever it might be, right? And it doesn't have to be a certain mold. So listen, thank you so much for sharing everything, your failures, being so open, being vulnerable, and actually sharing some really good stuff about the industry. I'm sure that someone out there listening to this call probably resonated something with you, and they probably were able to get something out of this particular conversation to help them in their life. So I appreciate you doing this. And I appreciate you guys, listeners. Listen, because without you, I wouldn't be able to do this show. I wouldn't be able to do these interviews and post it on there, because I'll be just talking to myself, right? But you guys are on there, and I appreciate you doing this. If you have any questions or would like to get a hold of me or have an idea for a show, head over to my website, mastersunite.com. That's mastersunite.com, or hit me up on Facebook. We have a Facebook page on there, Immigrant Masters Unite, and we can definitely connect that way. So without further ado, this is Polish Peter from Immigrant Masters Unite, and I'll see you next time.